A stoic protector, the billionaire Julian Vance, returned to his late brother's estate only to be paralyzed by the sight of his young niece in a horrific situation, locked away like a forgotten secret. The rest of the house was a sterile, polished mausoleum of grief, but her room was a cage, and her silence was a scream he could feel in his own bones. Why would a child be caged like an animal in her own guardian's house? And who truly deserved to be brought into the light? The air in the monolithic marble foyer was cold, a manufactured chill that had nothing to do with the autumn wind sighing through the ancient oaks outside. Julian Vance felt it seep into his tailored suit, a cold that settled deeper than skin, a cold that felt like a premonition. It had been a year since the twisting metal and shattered glass on a rain-slicked highway had stolen his brother, David, and his vibrant wife, Sarah, from the world. A year since their daughter, his niece, 5-year-old Lily, had been left in the care of her maternal aunt, Eleanor Croft. Julian had been overseas, closing a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that now felt like ash in his mouth. He had sent money, of course. Endless, effortless wire transfers to ensure Lily wanted for nothing. He had trusted that Eleanor, a woman who curated a public image of philanthropic grace, would be a sanctuary for the traumatized child. That trust was beginning to curdle. The house itself was the first warning. David's home had been a place of chaotic warmth, of books stacked on every surface, of Sarah's half-finished paintings leaning against walls, of the lingering scent of baking and freshly cut flowers. Now it was a museum, polished, silent, and utterly lifeless. Every book was gone, replaced by tasteful, unread hardbacks arranged by color. Sarah's art had vanished, the walls now adorned with generic, expensive landscapes. It was as if the very souls of his brother and sister-in-law had been methodically scrubbed from their own home, erased by a curator with a heart of ice. Eleanor met him at the door, a vision of composed sorrow in black silk. Her smile was a perfect, practiced curve that didn't reach her cool, assessing eyes. "Julian," she said, her voice a smooth, low melody. "It's been too long. Thank you for coming. This day is difficult." He returned her air kiss with a stiff nod, his gaze sweeping the sterile expanse. "Eleanor, where is Lily? I was hoping to see her." Eleanor's smile tightened for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of annoyance he would have missed if he weren't already on edge. "She's resting, poor dear. She's been so fragile since the accident. Her sleep schedule is paramount to her recovery, the doctors say. We mustn't disturb her." The explanation was plausible. Too plausible. It was a pre-written script, delivered with flawless poise. He felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. During their stilted conversation over tasteless, lukewarm tea in the cavernous living room, he learned that Eleanor was the chairwoman of a prominent children's charity, that she was hosting their annual fundraising gala next month, and that she was considered a pillar of the community. She spoke of Lily in abstract, clinical terms, the child's trauma, her therapeutic regimen, the need for a low-stimulus environment. She never once used her name with any warmth. She never once sounded like an aunt speaking of a beloved niece. She sounded like a warden discussing an inmate. Julian excused himself, claiming a need to visit his old room, but his feet carried him down the familiar upstairs hallway, towards the one place that should have still held some life, Lily's playroom. He remembered it as a wonderland of color and imagination, its walls covered in Sarah's whimsical murals of talking animals and magical forests. He reached the door and his blood ran cold. It was closed, and in the center of the heavy oak, a new, gleaming brass deadbolt had been installed. It was locked, a child's playroom, locked from the outside. He stood there for a long moment, the silence of the house pressing in on him. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound from within, a soft, scraping thud, followed by a pause, and then again. Thud, pause, thud. It was a sound of profound loneliness, of a world shrunk down to a single, repetitive motion. The carefully constructed dam of his composure began to crack. He turned, his movements now sharp and deliberate, and walked not to his room, but to his brother's study. Eleanor had cleaned the house, but she wouldn't know the secrets of its bones. David, ever cautious, had kept a master key to every lock in the house, hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick on the top shelf. Julian's fingers found the worn spine, retrieved the heavy iron key, and returned to the locked door, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. The key slid into the lock. The tumblers yielded with a sickeningly loud click. He turned the knob, pushed the door open, and stepped into a nightmare. The whimsical murals were gone, painted over with a sterile, institutional gray. The vibrant carpets had been torn out, replaced by a cold, bare wooden floor. All the toys, the books, the stuffed animals that had been Lily's constant companions were gone. The room was an empty box, a cell. In the far corner, a small, stained mattress lay on the floor, and on that mattress sat Lily. She was tiny, a fragile collection of sharp angles and pale skin, dressed in a faded, oversized t-shirt. Her dark, curly hair, once so full of life, was lank and matted. She was rocking back and forth, her small head rhythmically tapping the cold, gray wall. Thud. Pause. Thud. She didn't look up. She didn't seem to register his presence at all. She was lost, adrift in a sea of neglect so vast it had swallowed her whole. The air was thick with the sour smell of stale air and human misery. A single, barred window high on the wall let in a sliver of weak afternoon light, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the dead air. Julian's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a low-stimulus environment. This was sensory deprivation. This was a prison. He took a slow step forward, his expensive leather shoes making a shockingly loud sound on the bare floor. Lily flinched, curling into herself like a threatened animal, her rocking ceasing. Her eyes, wide and dark and utterly vacant, finally lifted to meet his. There was no recognition in them, only a deep, bottomless fear. He saw the ghost of his brother in the curve of her cheek, the echo of Sarah in the sprinkle of freckles across her nose. And he saw a devastation so complete it threatened to shatter him. He sank to his knees, moving with a slowness born of a desperate need not to frighten her further. "Lily?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's me. It's Uncle Julian." There was no response, just that vast, empty stare. He held out a hand, palm up, an offering of peace. She shrank away from it, pressing herself harder against the wall. The sight broke something deep inside him, a foundational belief in the goodness of the world. He had built an empire on logic, on predicting outcomes, on controlling variables. But this was a monstrous chaos he could not comprehend. He retreated slightly, giving her space, his mind racing. He needed to get her out of there. Now, he scanned the desolate room again, his gaze falling on a small plastic bowl and a cup near the mattress. The bowl was empty save for a few dried crumbs. The water in the cup was cloudy. Protective rage, cold and pure, began to displace the shock. It was a familiar feeling, an old friend from a past he had fought hard to leave behind, a time before the tailored suits and boardrooms. It was the righteous fury of a protector who had found his charge in the hands of a monster. He looked at the small, broken girl before him, the last living piece of his beloved brother, and a silent, unbreakable vow formed in the core of his being. "I will not fail you. I will not leave you. I will find the truth, and I will burn down the world of the person who did this to you." With infinite patience, he sat on the floor, a safe distance away, and simply waited. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just existed in her space, a quiet, solid presence. After what felt like an eternity, her rocking began again, slower this time, more hesitant. He had to get her clean, get her fed, get her somewhere safe. He slowly rose and approached the mattress. This time, when he reached for her, she didn't flinch away. She simply went limp, a small, light weight in his arms as he lifted her. He carried her out of that cold, gray tomb and into the hallway, wrapping her in the warmth of his suit jacket. As he walked towards the master bathroom, he felt a small, almost imperceptible tremor run through her body. He looked down and saw a single tear trace a path through the grime on her cheek. It was the first sign of life, the first spark in the void, and it solidified his resolve into something as hard and unyielding as diamond. In the opulent, sterile bathroom, he turned on the warm water in the large tub, his movements gentle and sure. He had to see the extent of the damage. He had to know what he was fighting. As he carefully slipped the dirty t-shirt over her head, his breath hitched. It wasn't just neglect. On her thin upper arm, a series of small, perfectly circular bruises formed a ghostly imprint of a large hand that had squeezed far, far too hard. And on her shoulder, puckered and white against her pale skin, was the unmistakable silvery scar of an old burn. This was the dark secret, the irrefutable, physical text of Eleanor's cruelty. This was not the work of a clumsy, grieving child. This was the work of a monster wearing a mask of grace. The cold rage in his chest ignited into a white-hot inferno. The investigation had just begun. He carried the clean, sleeping child, now wrapped in the plushest towel he could find, downstairs. He laid her gently on the long sofa in the living room, covering her with a cashmere throw. Then he waited. Eleanor entered a few minutes later, a false, tinkling laugh on her lips. "There you are, Julian. I was just about to—" She stopped dead, her eyes locking on the small form on the couch. Her mask of civility slipped, revealing a flash of pure, reptilian fury before it was hastily shoved back into place. "What have you done?" she hissed, her voice losing its melodic quality. "I told you she was not to be disturbed." Julian didn't rise. He remained seated in the armchair opposite the sofa, a silent sentinel. He let the silence stretch, watching her, letting her unease mount. Finally he spoke, his voice low and dangerously calm. "I went to her playroom." Eleanor, her face paled. "You had no right. It's locked from the outside," he continued, ignoring her protest. "It's empty. It's a cage. I found her hitting her head against the wall." The gaslighting began instantly, a torrent of practiced deception. "You don't understand," she exclaimed, her voice rising with manufactured hysteria. "You've been gone. You don't see her every day. She's not the same child. The trauma, it's made her violent, unpredictable. She self-harms." Julian, the doctor, a top child psychologist, Dr. Finch, he said we had to create a low-stimulus environment to keep her from hurting herself. The lock is for her own protection, to stop her from wandering, from falling down the stairs. It was a masterful performance. She was the picture of a concerned, overwhelmed guardian, pushed to extreme measures by a tragic situation. She gestured wildly, her eyes wide with feigned earnestness. "The bruises you probably saw? She gets them constantly. She runs into things, falls over nothing. She's lost in her own little world. It breaks my heart to see her like this, but I am doing everything the experts tell me to do." Julian listened, his expression unreadable. Every word was a lie, a carefully constructed brick in the wall of her deceit. He thought of the burn scar, of the fingerprint-shaped bruises. He thought of the vacant terror in Lily's eyes. He stood up, his height and stillness suddenly dominating the room. "Which doctor, Eleanor? Give me his name and number. I'd like to speak with him myself." Panic flickered in her eyes again, but she recovered quickly. "Dr. Alistair Finch. A brilliant man. Of course, his files are confidential. Patient privacy. But I assure you he has only Lily's best interests at heart." "As do I." Julian nodded slowly. "I see. I'm taking her with me for a second opinion." "You can't," Eleanor shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "I am her legal guardian. You have no authority." "I have a moral authority," Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more menacing than any shout. "And I have more resources than you can possibly imagine. Do not try to stop me." He gently lifted the sleeping Lily from the couch. She stirred, making a small, whimpering sound in her sleep, and burrowed her face into his shoulder. The small, trusting gesture sent a wave of fierce, paternal protectiveness through him that was so powerful it almost buckled his knees. He turned and walked towards the door, not looking back. Eleanor's voice followed him, a venomous parting shot. "You'll regret this, Julian." "You're unstable. I'll call the police. I'll tell them you've kidnapped a sick child." He didn't reply. He walked out of the cold, silent house and into the crisp autumn air, the small, warm weight in his arms a promise and a purpose. The war had begun. Julian drove not to a hospital, but to the penthouse suite of the Vance Tower, a gleaming skyscraper that was the heart of his global empire. It was a fortress of privacy and security. He had already summoned his most trusted employee, a former pediatric nurse named Maria, a kind, grandmotherly woman who had been with his company for 20 years. She met them at the private elevator, her face a mask of professional calm that barely concealed her horror at the sight of the frail, silent child. "Get her comfortable, Maria," Julian instructed, his voice tight. "Anything she needs. A doctor is on the way, a friend I trust implicitly." No one else gets in or out while Maria tended to Lily, creating a soft nest of blankets and bringing her a warm bowl of soup which the child hesitantly ate. Julian began his methodical assault. He was no longer just an uncle, he was a hunter. He set up a command center in the sweet study, his laptop humming to life. His first call was to Dr. Lena Petrova, a renowned child psychologist who had once consulted for his foundation. He explained the situation in clipped, precise terms, omitting no detail of the room, the neglect, or the marks on Lily's body. Dr. Petrova's voice was grim. "Julian, from what you're describing, this is severe trauma bonding and neglect. The low-stimulus explanation is a classic justification for isolation and abuse. The bruises, the burn, you need to document everything. I will be there in an hour." His next step was to probe Eleanor's story. Dr. Alistair Finch. A quick search through medical registries and professional networks came up empty. There was no licensed child psychologist by that name practicing in the state. The name was a fabrication, a clumsy one, but one she believed he would be too grief-stricken or too distant to verify. This was the first concrete crack in her facade. While he waited for Dr. Petrova, Julian sat with Lily. Maria had bathed her again, gently washing her matted hair. Dressed in a soft, new pajama set, she looked even smaller, more fragile. She sat on the floor with a sketchpad and crayons Julian had asked Maria to procure. She didn't draw pictures. She made dark, violent scribbles, pressing the black and gray crayons so hard they snapped. Julian watched, his heart aching. He recognized the motion. It was the same frantic energy as her head tapping against the wall. It was trauma given form. He sat on the floor near her, not speaking, simply being present. After a long while, she stopped scribbling. She picked up a blue crayon and drew a single, shaky rectangle in the corner of the page. A door. Then, with the black crayon, she drew thick, heavy lines across it. A lock. It was her first piece of testimony. A silent scream on paper. Dr. Petrova's arrival was a quiet whirlwind of gentle competence. She didn't crowd Lily. Instead, she sat on the floor with her, speaking in a low, soothing voice, asking nothing, simply narrating her own actions as she played with a set of building blocks. Over the next hour, Julian watched in awe as Lily, for the first time, seemed to engage with the world outside her own head. She reached out a hesitant hand and took a block. It was a monumental step. Dr. Petrova's assessment, delivered to Julian in the study while Lily was safely with Maria, was stark and unequivocal. The child is suffering from severe neglect, emotional abuse, and likely physical abuse. Her mutism is elective, a trauma response. She has retreated into a world she can control because the one outside is terrifying. The story about self-harm is almost certainly a projection. The abuser is blaming the victim for the injuries they themselves inflicted. Julian, this isn't just a matter for a family discussion. This is a criminal case. The validation hardened Julian's resolve. He needed more than his own observations. He needed external proof. He needed to dismantle Eleanor's public persona brick by brick until only the monster underneath was visible. The next morning, he drove to his brother's neighborhood. He parked down the street from the house, now a place that felt tainted, evil. He approached the house next door, a modest but well-kept home with a garden full of late-blooming roses. An elderly woman was watering them, her back to him. "Excuse me," Julian said gently. The woman turned, her eyes widening in recognition. She was Mrs. Gable, a neighbor David and Sarah had always spoken of fondly. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Mrs. Gable. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about my niece." Lily, the woman's friendly expression, immediately shuddered. Fear clouded her eyes. She looked nervously towards Eleanor's house. I don't see much of the little one," she stammered. "Her aunt is very protective. Keeps to herself." Julian saw the lie. He saw the terror. This was the reluctant witness. He softened his voice, infusing it with all the earnestness he possessed. "Mrs. Gable, my brother and Sarah trusted you. They said you were the kindest person on this street. I know you're afraid. I am not here to cause trouble for you. I am here to protect a child. Lily is not well. She is not safe. I need to know what you've seen." He watched a war play out on her face. Fear against conscience. He saw the tears well in her eyes. "She used to play in the garden," Mrs. Gable whispered, her voice thick with emotion. After the accident, for the first few weeks, she was still out there. Quiet, but she was there. Then, she just disappeared. I haven't seen her outside in almost 10 months. Her voice dropped even lower. "But I've heard her, crying, late at night. It's a terrible, lonely sound. Once I saw Miss Croft dragging her back inside from the porch. The little girl had tried to run out. The way she was holding her arm, it was cruel. I wanted to call someone, but she's an important woman. She has powerful friends. I was scared." It was the first external stone cast at Eleanor's glittering image. "It was enough. You did the right thing by telling me," Julian said, his voice full of a gratitude that was deeply sincere. "You won't be alone in this. I promise." Julian now had a witness, medical validation, and a fabricated doctor. It was a strong start, but it wasn't enough to shatter an ironclad legal guardianship held by a public figure. He needed something undeniable, something that would utterly incinerate Eleanor's credibility. He needed to understand her motive. Cruelty for its own sake was one thing, but the systematic erasure of David and Sarah, the complete isolation of Lily, it felt calculated. It felt like a means to an end. The answer, as it so often did, lay in the money. David had been a successful architect, but Sarah had come from old money. Together, their estate was substantial. Their will, which Julian had a copy of, was simple. Everything was to be placed in a trust for Lily, to be managed by her guardian until she turned 25. Eleanor, as guardian, had control. Julian hired a team of forensic accountants, the best in the world, men and women who could find a single misplaced cent in a hurricane of shell corporations. He gave them a simple directive: follow the money. All of it. The results came back in less than 48 hours, and they were breathtaking in their avarice. Eleanor had been systematically draining Lily's trust fund. It wasn't a slow leak. It was a deluge. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been funneled through a series of shell accounts and then used for personal enrichment. A new luxury car, couture wardrobes, a down payment on a villa in Tuscany, and, in a move of stunningly cynical audacity, tens of thousands of dollars in charitable donations made in her own name to the very foundation she chaired, cementing her status as a great philanthropist using a child's inheritance. The motive was clear: greed. Lily wasn't just a burden to Eleanor. She was an obstacle, a living reminder of the source of her newfound wealth. By isolating her, by medically kidnapping her under the guise of trauma, Eleanor could ensure no one, no teachers, no doctors, no friends, would ever get close enough to see the truth or question the finances. The child had to be a ghost so Eleanor could live like a queen. This was the first major twist, the cold, calculating engine behind the cruelty. But financial records could be explained away, spun by clever lawyers as mismanagement or complex estate planning. Julian needed more. He needed to see Eleanor's actions, to hear her words. He thought back to the house. David had been a tech enthusiast, always installing the latest gadgets. Julian remembered him proudly showing off a new, state-of-the-art home security system, complete with discrete cameras in the main living areas and hallways. Eleanor would have surely disabled it or erased the local storage. But David was paranoid about security. He would have subscribed to the cloud backup service. He dispatched a cybersecurity expert, a young genius he'd poached from a rival firm, with a court order obtained by his legal team on an emergency basis. The expert, working from a remote terminal, bypassed the local system and accessed the cloud servers. Most of the data from the past year had been wiped. But in a digital archive, slated for permanent deletion but not yet gone, they found it. A folder labeled nannycam_backup_initial, it contained footage from the first 2 months after the accident, a period when Eleanor had briefly employed a nanny before firing her. Julian had the files encrypted and sent to his secure server. He opened the first video, his hand trembling slightly. The footage was time-stamped 3 weeks after the funeral. It showed Eleanor in the living room, cooing over Lily, reading her a story, the picture of a loving aunt. The performance was flawless. He skipped ahead, opening files from later and later dates. The change was chilling. The mask began to slip. The cooing was replaced by clipped, impatient tones. The gentle touches became harsh tugs. Then, he found the video that would become the centerpiece of his case. The camera was positioned in the upstairs hallway, aimed at the door to Lily's playroom. The date was 2 months after the accident. Eleanor appears, dragging a crying Lily by the arm. "Stop it!" Eleanor snarls, her voice a venomous rasp completely alien to her public persona. "Your sniveling is driving me insane. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for you?" Lily, small and terrified, just sobs. "I want mommy." Eleanor's face contorts with a terrifying rage. She yanks Lily closer, her fingers digging into the child's small arm, right where Julian had found the bruises. "Your mother is gone. They are both gone. You are nothing but a ghost in my house, a constant, whining drain on my life and my money. You will stay in your room, and you will be silent." She shoves Lily into the playroom, the child stumbling and falling. The camera captures the raw hatred in Eleanor's face as she slams the door, the sound of the deadbolt being thrown echoing in the silent hallway. Julian felt the air leave his lungs. It was the smoking gun. It was irrefutable. He kept watching. The folder contained more than just abuse. It contained the conspiracy. A later video from a camera in the study captured a phone call. Eleanor was speaking in a hushed, conspiratorial tone. "Yes, Dr. Finch, the documents are perfect," she was saying. "The assessment of acute pediatric PTSD with self-harming tendencies is exactly what I need. It gives me complete medical authority. No one will question me. The payment has been transferred to the offshore account as we discussed." She paused, listening. "No one suspects a thing. Her uncle is a recluse, hasn't been seen in months. By the time he shows his face, if he ever does, the narrative will be set in stone. She's the tragic, broken child, and I am her selfless savior." This was the second twist, the revelation that Dr. Alistair Finch wasn't just a fabrication. He was part of a deliberate, fraudulent scheme to legally isolate and control Lily. Eleanor hadn't just lied. She had built an entire false medical reality around her niece. The recording was a confession of fraud, conspiracy, and medical malpractice. Julian now had everything: the motive, the witness, the physical evidence, and a confession on tape. He had the weapon. Now he needed someone to help him aim it. He made one more call. Not to the police, not yet. Eleanor was right about one thing. She had money and influence. A direct police report could get buried in legal maneuvering, forcing Lily to endure months, or even years, of court appearances and psychological evaluations, all while Eleanor's lawyers painted Julian as a vindictive, unstable interloper. He would not put Lily through that. He needed to destroy Eleanor's power base first. He needed to obliterate her public support so thoroughly that no one would dare stand with her. He called Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was the lead counsel for his corporation, a woman whose mind was as sharp as a shard of glass and whose spine was made of tungsten steel. She had negotiated hostile takeovers against titans of industry and had never lost. She arrived at the penthouse within the hour, her expression impassive as Julian laid out the entire story, playing the videos and showing her the financial reports. As she watched the footage of Eleanor abusing Lily, the impassive mask on her face didn't crack, but a dangerous glint appeared in her eyes. When it was over, she was silent for a full minute. Then she said, her voice quiet and lethal, "We are not just going to ruin her, Julian. We are going to erase her." Evelyn's plan was audacious and brutal. A public execution, she called it. She has built her entire identity around her public image as a philanthropist and child advocate. We will use that stage to hang her. The target was perfect. The upcoming Evergreen Foundation for Children's Future's annual gala, where Eleanor was not just the chairwoman but also the guest of honor, set to receive the Humanitarian of the Year award. She will be at her most confident, surrounded by her allies, basking in adoration. Evelyn explained, her fingers steepled. She will feel untouchable. That is when we strike. The plan was meticulous. Evelyn would handle the legal side, preparing an airtight case file to be delivered to the district attorney and child protective services the moment the public confrontation began. She would have uniformed officers on standby at a nearby location, ready to move in on her signal. Julian's team would handle the technical side, ensuring they could seize control of the audiovisual systems at the gala. Julian's only job was to be the catalyst. While they prepared, Eleanor, realizing that Julian had disappeared with Lily and was not responding to her frantic calls, made her countermove. It was as predictable as it was desperate. She filed a police report, just as she had threatened. She claimed that her brother-in-law, Julian Vance, clearly suffering a mental breakdown from grief, had kidnapped his medically fragile niece. She produced the fraudulent report from the non-existent Dr. Finch, detailing Lily's supposed severe psychological issues and the urgent need for her specialized care that only Eleanor could provide. The police, faced with a report from a prominent citizen and a seemingly legitimate medical document, issued a bolo, "Be on the lookout" for Julian's car. It was a clever move, designed to paint him as the villain and her as the frantic, worried guardian. The story was leaked to a sympathetic journalist, and a headline appeared on a local news blog. Tech billionaire in custody dispute over traumatized niece. Eleanor was trying to control the narrative, to poison the well before Julian could even speak. It was a race against time. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel was a glittering sea of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow on tables draped in white linen, and the air hummed with the self-congratulatory chatter of the city's elite. Eleanor Croft was the radiant center of it all, moving through the room in a shimmering emerald gown, accepting praise and accolades with practiced humility. She stood on the stage, a crystal award in her hand, a beatific smile on her face as she looked out at the adoring crowd. "To protect a child," she said, her voice resonating with false emotion, "is the noblest calling of all. Our city's most vulnerable children are not a burden. They are a sacred trust. A trust one am humbled to accept." The room erupted in applause. At that moment, the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Julian Vance stepped inside. He wore a simple, dark suit, no tie. He was an island of somber stillness in the glittering ocean of the gala. He began to walk down the central aisle, his pace unhurried, his eyes fixed on the stage. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Security guards moved to intercept him, but there was an aura of cold, unbreakable purpose about him that made them hesitate. Eleanor's smile froze on her face. Her eyes widened in a mixture of shock and fury. She tried to recover, raising a hand to quiet the crowd, her voice taking on a tone of patronizing concern. "Julian," she said into the microphone, her voice dripping with pity. "My dear Julian, we are all so worried about you. This is hardly the time or place for one of your episodes. Please, let's not make a scene." Julian didn't stop until he reached the foot of the stage. He looked up at her, his face impassive, but his eyes burned with a righteous fire. He ignored her completely and spoke to the audience, his voice calm, clear, and carrying to every corner of the silent room. "My name is Julian Vance. That woman," he said, pointing a single, steady finger at Eleanor, "is the sister of my late sister-in-law. Tonight, you honor her for her dedication to children. I am here to show you who you are truly celebrating." A collective gasp went through the room. Eleanor's face went white. "Security!" she shrieked. "Remove this man!" But it was too late. On the massive screen behind her, where a slideshow of smiling children had been playing, the image suddenly switched. It was a bank statement. Then another and another. Red circles highlighted massive withdrawals from the Lily Vance Trust Fund and corresponding deposits into accounts owned by Eleanor Croft. The screen split, showing receipts for couture dresses, for a sports car, for a villa in Italy. The crowd began to mutter, the sound growing from a hum to a roar of confusion and suspicion. "These are lies. Forgeries!" Eleanor screamed, but her voice was thin and panicked. "He's lost his mind." Julian's voice cut through the noise, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "That is my niece's inheritance. Money her parents left to secure her future. Money this woman has been stealing to fund her lifestyle and to buy your admiration with donations of stolen funds." He paused, letting the accusation hang in the air. Then he delivered the killing blow. "But that is not her greatest crime." The screen changed again. The ballroom was plunged into an utterly profound silence as the video from the nanny cam began to play. The audio was pristine. They all heard Eleanor's venomous snarl, saw her grab the crying, terrified child. They heard her scream, "You are nothing but a ghost in my house, a constant, whining drain on my life and my money." They watched in collective horror as she threw the little girl into the empty room and slammed the door, the sound of the deadbolt locking echoing like a gunshot through the ballroom's high-end sound system. The video ended, leaving Eleanor's enraged face frozen on the giant screen behind her, a monstrous gargoyle of hate. The illusion was not just broken, it had been atomized. No one was clapping now. They were staring, their faces masks of shock and revulsion. Eleanor stood, trembling, exposed. "It's fake!" she sobbed. "A pathetic, desperate lie. It's doctored footage. He's trying to ruin me. He kidnapped my sick niece." As if on cue, a side door opened. Evelyn Reed walked in, followed by the elderly Mrs. Gable. Evelyn escorted the trembling but resolute neighbor to a microphone on the floor. "My name is Martha Gable," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I live next door. I heard the crying for months. I saw her cruelty with my own eyes. I was just too afraid to speak up. I'm not afraid anymore." The simple, devastating testimony landed like a final nail in Eleanor's coffin. But there was one more act to come. The final twist, the one that would seal her fate emotionally as well as legally. Julian turned to the side door and held out his hand. A small figure emerged from the shadows, led by Dr. Petrova. It was Lily. She was dressed in a simple dress, her hair clean and brushed, her hand held tightly in Julian's. She was no longer vacant. Her eyes were clear, and though she was frightened by the crowd, she was not broken. She looked across the stage at the woman who had tormented her. Eleanor stared, her mouth agape. "Lily, baby," she whimpered, trying one last, desperate appeal. Lily looked at the monster from her nightmares. She took a small, steadying breath. And then, in a voice that was small but rang with the unimpeachable power of truth, she said her first word in over a year. No, it was a complete sentence. A judgment. A verdict. It was the sound of a cage breaking open. That single word did what the financial records and the video could not. It gave the abuse a human voice. Eleanor Croft finally, completely broke. A guttural scream of pure, animal rage tore from her throat. She lunged forward, not at Julian, but at the control podium, trying to smash it, to stop the images, to silence the truth. At that moment, two uniformed police officers, who had been waiting discreetly at the back of the room, walked calmly onto the stage. They took her by the arms. Her fight dissolved into pathetic, racking sobs as they led her away, her social and moral ruin absolute and complete. Julian knelt and wrapped his arms around Lily, shielding her from the spectacle. as the world that Eleanor had built on lies and cruelty came crashing down around them. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Eleanor Croft. The trial was a media sensation, but the verdict was never in doubt. The video evidence was unassailable. Mrs. Gable's testimony was heartbreakingly credible, and the forensic accountants laid out a case of embezzlement so clear and audacious it left the jury stunned. Dr. Finch was discovered to be a disgraced former physician who had lost his license years ago for fraud. He testified against Eleanor in exchange for a lighter sentence. Eleanor was convicted on all counts: felony child abuse, aggravated kidnapping, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge, his face a mask of cold fury as he read the sentencing, called her actions a betrayal of humanity's most sacred trust, and gave her the maximum possible sentence: 25 years to life in a state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 20. She was stripped of every stolen cent, her villa seized, her reputation incinerated. She vanished from society, a ghost in her own right, locked in a cell of her own making. For Julian and Lily, the legal process was quieter. With Evelyn Reed's expert guidance, Julian was granted permanent legal custody, and the adoption was fast-tracked. The court-appointed child advocate's report was glowing, citing the remarkable progress Lily had made in Julian's care. She was beginning to speak more, to smile, and to emerge from the deep, dark shell where she had hidden for so long. Julian sold the grand, haunted estate on the hill. He couldn't bear to step foot in it again, and he knew Lily needed a place with no memories, no ghosts, no locked doors. He bought a house by the sea, a warm, light-filled cottage with large windows that looked out onto the endless horizon of the ocean. It was the antithesis of Eleanor's cold, marble prison. It was a place of warmth, of sunlight, of the soothing, constant rhythm of the waves. Their new life began to take shape one quiet day at a time. Julian, the man who commanded a global empire from a sterile office high above the city, discovered the simple, profound joy of making pancakes in the morning, of reading bedtime stories, of pushing a child on a swing until her laughter filled the salt-tinged air. He delegated more of his work, his priorities irrevocably shifted. The haunted, solitary man began to heal, his own past traumas soothed by the fierce, protective love he felt for this resilient little girl. He was no longer just a billionaire or a businessman, he was a father. Lily's transformation was a quiet miracle. With the help of Dr. Petrova and the unwavering safety of Julian's presence, she slowly unfurled like a flower that had been deprived of sun. The nightmares began to fade. The silence was replaced by questions, by observations, by the joyful, nonsensical songs that only a happy child can sing. She was reclaiming the childhood that had been stolen from her. One sunny afternoon, about a year after the gala, Julian was sitting on the porch, watching Lily draw at a small wooden table. She was completely absorbed, her brow furrowed in concentration. For a long time, she had only drawn the sea, the birds, the sun, big, safe, natural things. But today, she was drawing people. When she was finished, she brought the drawing to him, holding it up with a proud smile. It was a picture of a very large man with a smiling face and a very small girl with curly hair holding hands. They were standing in front of a little house with a bright yellow sun shining down on them. And on the house she had drawn a big, red door. It was wide open. Julian felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but this time it wasn't grief or rage. It was an overwhelming, heart-expanding love. He pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her clean, curly hair, and for the first time since his brother's death, he felt a sense of profound, unshakable peace. He had not just rescued a child. She had rescued him, too. Evil often wears a beautiful and convincing mask, hiding its rotten core behind a facade of charity, grace, and public approval. It thrives in the shadows of our doubt, in the fear of the reluctant witness, and in the silence of its victims. But the truth, however deeply buried, has a voice. Sometimes, that voice is a quiet protector who refuses to look away, a person whose own broken past has taught them to recognize the cracks in a flawless veneer. They are the ones who will dare to turn the key in the locked door, to step into the darkness, and to bring the horrors within into the cleansing, unforgiving light. How many locked doors do we walk past every day in our own neighborhoods, in our own families? And what does it take for one person to have the courage to stop, to listen for the crying, and to turn the key? The world needs more protectors, more people willing to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. If this story touched you, please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Every story of courage shared is a light against the darkness. Thank you for listening,